Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful Wednesday afternoon. If you can, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have you here and hopefully ready to go on board. We have a very exciting session ahead of us today where hopefully we can learn lots and lots. I'm very much looking forward to it, so I hope you are too. Before we get on with the session, just a reminder that it will last for roughly around about 45 minutes. We're going to start with a presentation from our speaker before we'll later move on to a student Q&A. For that Q&A, you can submit as many questions as you like in response to anything that's said today, and you can do that by submitting them in our Q&A box, which is just underneath the stream on your screens. You might find that you have to scroll down a little bit to be able to see that box, but it's open now and it's going to remain open throughout. So, moving on today's main event, we're very, very excited to have this speaker with us. It's a really, really interesting subject, I think. We're looking into the world of reptiles, and I think he does have a little bit of mammal experience as well. So, really excited to find out about the world of all of these reptile creatures that live on our planet and know a little bit more about them. It's always very exciting when we get to explore a little bit into the science and the world of, I think it would fall into biology, but we'll find out. But everyone, please put your hands together and welcome Patrick. Hello.
Hello, hi.
Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Very, very excited to have you here, and for us to kind of learn more, really. So it should be an exciting one. I'm going to hand over to you straight away for your presentation.
Okay, great. Well, it's wonderful to be here too, and thank you for the opportunity given me to be able to just share my career path and how I got to where I've gotten to at this point in my career. So, to reintroduce myself, Patrick Campbell. I am the senior curator of reptiles at the Natural History Museum in London, which some of you may have visited or will be visiting at some point in your school life. And my talk will be about choices, because we will all be faced with choices at some point in our lives, especially in your young lives at this present moment in your career. There'll be a whole suite of choices in front of you, and those choices, for me, were about combining passion, education, and career paths. So, next slide, please. So, I was an inquisitive child. I loved reading the encyclopedia when I was younger, and just delving into different worlds and different types of careers and uh, avenues of learning. I also loved animals. We had a big house. I lived in a big house with many cats and dogs and birds and tortoises and various other creatures, which some of my school friends, did not have. And so naturally, I developed a liking for animals. And one of my very first um, areas of choice that I would have loved to have developed as a career would have been to become a vet because of this. Next slide, please. My active childhood, in the next slide, even went on to me sort of developing time in the Cub Scouts, which was held at my school. I also ventured into the Air Cadets world, and there were various church clubs that I was part of as well. One called Pathfinders, which took us out into the outdoors, and that sort of helped me kind of develop a love for the outdoors as well. I shall be developing that sort of love a little bit later on as you see how my career path developed further. I also loved playing football, and I was part of a very active football club's arena. I played football for many different clubs, and I also loved the water. Um, I liked swimming, uh, so I also developed a love for the water and for oceans, etc. And that also feeds into the way my career path developed as well at the museum. Next slide, please. So, as I said earlier at the beginning of my talk, life is about choices. And the same could be said of your career. And you'll be making many choices as you go through schooling. For me, in particular, I had a sort of natural tendency to like the sciences and art, and I had a sort of natural ability to be good at art. And I had to come to a point of decision where I had to make a choice between the two. But my art teachers loved me so much and wanted me to continue with the art so much, despite my choosing science, that she allowed me to continue on with the art as an extra subject. So I carried both into secondary school. So secondary school was my next destination. Next slide, please. I went to a school in Paddington. It was much larger than my primary school, so it was a bit of a culture shock for me. And my choices were then set to examinations. Next slide, please. Becoming a vet was something that my parents weren't too happy with, so they thought perhaps maybe you should go into medical school or medicine, at which point you could actually treat human beings rather than animals. And so I took a look at it because I wanted to respect my parents' sort of kind of encouragement, and wanted to respect their the thought of as being um, in these sort of upper echelons of intelligence, should we say, and we were taken on a special trip to a medical school in Paddington, uh, and it was quite an awakening sort of time for me as we were put into a small room at one point in our trip, in our tour behind the scenes, and there were lots of big containers in this room, and the tour guide at the time said, well, if you're any of you of this small group of which we were part are squeamish at all, then it's probably best you leave the room now. And I thought, oh, what could you be squeamish about? What could be in these huge containers? And they proceeded to open one of them, and it was a container full of torsos, human torsos. And at that point, I decided, well, medical school just wasn't for me. So that was the end of that trip for me. But it was good to experience that that trip because it allowed me to then sort of have a look at other possible career paths and discount the ones which I felt were not for me. So never discount the negative experiences you have when deciding on a particular career path because they will help shape the career path that you really do want to go down. Next slide, please. So, onto the examinations. And as I said earlier, I decided to focus on science, physics, chemistry, maths, human biology, and biology. And then I put arts as a secondary career choice, backup for a career path. And I left school with the qualifications required to go on to A levels. Next slide. So you do learn from negative experiences, not only at school, not only with the career choices you make and the experiences you have on various tours to various art galleries, museums, medical schools, what have you. But in the world of work, after leaving school, you learn from the sort of, I shouldn't say really negative experiences, but experiences that you probably would not have chosen for yourself, but you had to work in various places in order to just gain experience in sort of waking up in the mornings, routine, um, socializing with people in the in the area of work rather than in school, becoming a young adult, and all of those experiences too, just by getting a job. So I worked um, in various places. I worked making pizzas. I worked in a clothes factory. I worked in the Department of Employment, helping others to get jobs too. So I had a varied early work experience life. Next. And then came my dream job, the Natural History Museum, where I started off working as a um, early career curator. Next slide. This was the Department of Zoology at the time. When I arrived, I am on the second row at the back, if you can see me, towards the left. I started in 1986. If you did your calculations, you'll see that I've been at the museum now for over 37 years. And the time has flown by. Next slide. Thrust into one of the storerooms where all the specimens are kept in alcohol in the Department of Zoology. I was thrown into the deep end, rather, and I was asked to curate this row of specimens which are kept in alcohol for their longevity and preservation. And feeling a little bit isolated. Sometimes you may get thrown into or thrust into a work environment where you don't necessarily get all the help you need immediately. And I felt that this was the case here. Of course, my colleagues did assist throughout my time at the museum, but there were moments when I felt I needed to use my own initiative. So that's something that you need to think about as well. Next slide. Early days in the museum. This is my office. We were mostly on site during that time. There was a lot of deep end sort of learning and picking things up as you go along. As you can see, I'm trying to juggle various different things all at the same time, being on the phone, answering inquiries, writing in ledgers, which was the thing back then. We didn't have computers or emails or the internet in those days. We had to answer letters, and I had a typewriter as my sort of main form of mechanics to allow me to answer inquiries and so forth. Nowadays, of course, we have emails, we have computers, and all of those things. So I've been through IT development and many different sorts of changes in the world of work during my time. Next slide, please. You also learn from your colleagues, and we absorb a lot of experience from others who have been working in a particular institute directly by speaking with them and by socializing with them. Next slide, please. Lots of social get-togethers as well in the world of work. It's not all about work. It's about getting on with people. Next slide. And the next. And onto the world of work itself. Curation involves working with specimens directly, and we have to make sure that the specimens that are donated to the museum, that have been donated to the museum, as our specimens go back some 300 years in the museum, and we have to make sure that they continue to be preserved and available for scientific scholars and researchers from all around the world who come to visit, who ask for specimens to be sent to them on loan. So curation is our is what we do mostly in terms of keeping our specimens preserved for this end. And I initially worked in a fish section which had specimens as small as um, the size of a fingernail in some of the smallest gobies to something as big as a whale shark, which is the largest fish in the world. So we had a whole different range of storage containers and storage jars and so forth, enabling us to keep these things in perpetuity. And sometimes we have to move specimens from one building to another. Next slide. We also need to take tissue samples from specimens which come in for storage, because not only do we gather information from specimens just by looking at them under a microscope, we also need to uh, gather information from their DNA, and we can only do that by taking fresh tissue samples when they come in. So we dissect and sample specimens, not only at the institute itself, but now mostly in the field because we need them to be as fresh as possible. Next slide, please. Our work also includes, or involves rather, uh, disseminating that knowledge with background tours, sometimes visiting schools, and also sharing with our colleagues from other institutions abroad. So we go on networking trips to other museums. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, sometimes buildings become too small and we run out of room sometimes, so we have to move collections from one building to another. We're actually in a process of building a whole new scientific institution out at Reading at the moment, but in 2001 we moved specimens from one building to another, and our new building called the Darwin Centre, the one you see in the picture there, the glass one, has been up since 2001, and it took a whole year to move specimens, chiefly from the Department of Zoology, from the old building, which was eventually knocked down, into this new one. Next slide, please. And these are just some images from that move. Next slide. And the next. So we receive specimens as well. People and institutes give us specimens as part of a donation, or if specimens are washed up on a shore in the UK on our coast. Sometimes they go via the British Zoological Institute, which is the zoo, the Regent's Park, and they're autopsied before they're actually offered to us for storage. And this is a huge specimen that we received recently within the last couple of years called a leatherback turtle, which was washed ashore in the UK. And we had to preserve that huge specimen in a tank. But it now sits in one of our tanks in the Darwin Centre, in the tank room, for future research purposes. Next slide, please. But despite all of this amazing work going on at the museum, I still long to be outdoors. I needed more from the career that I was currently enjoying. So, next slide, please. My first bout of fieldwork actually occurred in the UK, where, whilst working for the fish group, I was sent out to Epping Forest to survey pike, which had taken over some of the lakes in Epping Forest. And these pike, which are sizable fish with sharp teeth, were eating everything in the lake. And they were also taking birds from the surface. So a colleague and I collected a few and surveyed the stomach contents to see exactly what they were eating. And I also joined the whale strandings team, which the zoology department had looking after stranded porpoises, dolphins, and whales. On one iconic specimen called a Thames whale, which swam up and down the Thames, I had to take a team out to deflesh the animal. This is the Thames whale, and it swam up and down the Thames in January of 2006, and it was in all the newspapers and was on the news and everything else, and it gathered a lot of public opinion. I think I should announce that there's a bit of a trigger warning on the next slide. So if you're squeamish, then turn away now. Next slide. So I led a curation team to clean up the Thames whale and to deflesh the Thames whale so that we can get it back and skeletonize it properly so that it can go on display, just the skeleton. And so this work took all day, and a team of about 10 curators from all the different sections in our department. But we did it, and the Thames whale then went on display in London, and now it sits in one of our storerooms, ready for the next exhibition. The next slide, please. My UK fieldwork continued, and I was then part of a team which went out to the River Thames. A lot of early morning starts, and it was a year-long project to collect mitten crabs, which had exploded in terms of population size in the Thames and was actually doing a lot of damage there to the ecosystem. Once again, eating all the fish eggs, which prevented our local fish from reproducing effectively, and where a lot of our local fish were dying out as a result. So we were experiencing species loss on a grand scale. So we were collecting these mitten crabs and measuring them and weighing them, etc., and writing reports just to how much the mitten crab was exploding as a population group. And then we thought about ways in which we can prevent this from happening by perhaps contacting Chinese restaurants, which would effectively reduce the population of mitten crabs if they were at all interested in marketing this as food. There was no sort of English restaurant that was interested in doing this because there just isn't the palate for mitten crab and crab meat in this country, unfortunately. Next slide, please. Pictures of the early morning starts with my colleague, and the fish bycatch had to be identified as well, and we wrote a lot of reports about the fish bycatch, also the mitten crabs and the measurements, etc. Next slide. There's also another UK fieldwork in Portland Harbour. So we had to survey the seabed prior to installing pipelines. Another kind of work that the museum gets itself involved with. And this was also an early morning start because we had to get out onto the seabed before the tides came in again. And again, it was an all-day thing where we had to then sift the samples we collected from the seabed, from the seafloor, and identify what we found, and then write a report. Next slide, please. We also attend conferences in the UK and abroad. So I've attended conferences in Belgium, Holland, Paris, USA, Washington, D.C., New York, and California in my time at the museum as a curator. Next slide. Also talks given in the UK, USA, China, and Brazil. Next slide, please. So the knowledge sharing is a constant theme during my time at the museum. Next slide. And then stepping away from the UK, my fieldwork experience extended to places like Spain, Malta, Greece, Thailand, Kenya, Ecuador, French Guyana, both as a museum diver and also as a terrestrial herpetologist. So these are some of my sort of diving exploits. Starfish in Spain, Andalusia. That was a starfish survey of a species of a genus called Astropecten, which is a comb sea star. And on this particular trip, there was an experience which was not for the light-hearted, where the area that we had to dive in was covered completely in stinging items, and we had to dive through those. And on surfacing, my face was covered completely in stings and swollen completely, but the work still had to be done. So sometimes it may sound glamorous, field work abroad, underwater, diving, etc. But work can sometimes be quite arduous and sometimes quite risky. Having said that, it all helps to give you a much more enriching experience at work. I also went to Alabama to collect some specimens for the fish group, and I attended a deep sea fishing rodeo, which is the largest in the world, over 2,000 participants over about a week. And my job was to encourage those who took part to, once they've weighed the fishes that they've caught and been given their rating as to how much of a prize they might be getting for the most strange fish caught or the largest fish caught of a particular category, then my job was to sort of encourage them to hand over that specimen to science afterwards. And because a lot of these fish were prized for their meat, I had to quickly learn how to deflesh it so that they can take the flesh away and with them and cook those, because we were only interested really in the skeletons, which allowed us to boost our skeleton collection of fish from that particular area of the world. Next slide, please. This particular diving exploit was part of a survey of the tsunami which occurred in 2004 in the Similan Islands. Some of you may have heard of the Boxing Day tsunami and the destruction that occurred because of it. Well, this particular fieldwork event involved the Natural History Museum, me as a diver, and the Royal Air Force, which used it as a sort of training exercise for some of their troops. So our job was to survey the area to see what fish were returning to the reefs which had been completely decimated by the tsunami. And it involved going underwater, seeing all the different fish go by and identifying them on spot with a sort of waterproof pen and board, making a note of how many went by, and then coming aboard ship again and diving for the next session. Sort of three 3 or so times a day for 2 weeks and writing a report on what we saw. Next slide, please. So moving on to sort of my sort of terrestrial field work. So above water, in forests, um, in deepest French Guiana, where we were collecting or looking for Sicilians, uh, various reptiles and amphibians. Next slide. Also the same in Kenya, where we slept mostly outdoors under a canopy, uh, under armed guard, just in case elephants trampled through the camp. Next slide. And also in Ecuador, where most of the field work involved climbing up mountains and sometimes, because the air was so thin up there, being completely exhausted when you got to the top, and then having to dig for Sicilians, which are sort of burrowing amphibians living underground. So that was quite an arduous trip as well. We were mostly in cloud forest, where the clouds sort of hung down quite low around us. Next slide. And this is the digging process. Again, you were able to hone your muscles on this particular trip. Next slide. Within the museum, there are a lot of things that you have to do in terms of sharing the knowledge with the world. So we have our own YouTube channel, and I have appeared in several YouTube channel events. Next slide. Research is also part of my position as a curator, senior curator at the museum, and I've produced or co-authored almost 100 scientific papers. One of my proudest moments has been named after a school classroom a few years back. Next slide. Also, another proud moment was visiting number 10 Downing Street, where we took a few specimens to represent the Wildlife Photographer of the Year for that year event that was happening at the museum. And it was the first time the museum had actually been invited to number 10 Downing Street to promote such an event. So in summary, career paths are a combination of your passion, education, and dedication. You experience both negative and positive events, but they also, whether they're negative or positive, they affect your choices, so don't discount them. And wherever your choices may take you, enjoy the ride. Thanks for listening. Happy to take your questions.
That was really, really interesting. And I have a question here to ask you first off that's anonymous. And it's obviously, I think you said that you were squeamish when it came to medical school. You decided that wasn't for you. And it said, how do you not get squeamish when dealing with animals? Because obviously you're dealing with skeletons. And you said, you had to learn to take the flesh off fish and things like that. So how did you deal with any sense of squeamishness that came along with that?
Yeah, it's just sort of over time and immersing yourself into something that, initially you think you have an adverse reaction to, but over time you get sort of desensitized to it, and then you see that the greater effect of what you're doing will allow you to not see it as something that is squeamish anymore. You see it as something that you're doing that's worthwhile and that's going to benefit the world in some way. So you very quickly learn how to push those feelings aside, I think, just by immersing yourself in it on a daily basis. I remember stepping into the arachnid floor of our department where there were just hundreds and hundreds of jars of spiders. And I had an adverse effect to it initially when I was faced with it, but walking through the storeroom, um, just regularly back and forth, the mind is a powerful thing. You kind of the mind kind of looks at it in a different way after a while, and the intrigue starts to come into effect. Whereas you're intrigued by all the different types of spiders there are in the world, and you want to look at them under a microscope. And so intrigue takes over the fear, and repetition takes away the anxiety and the squeamish feelings that you may have. So who knows? I may have been able to take on medical school and as a career, and perhaps not have experienced those feelings subsequently after the first visit. It may just have been a first visit type of reaction, perhaps. So after time, the short answer is over time, the body and the mind gets used to it.
Our next question, then, sort of leading on from that, spider sounds horrific, by the way, but whatever your brain has to do to deal with it. Um, what is your favourite specimen?
Yeah. So there's a snake called a gaboon viper. It's quite a stout, short-tailed snake, and it has a really big head, like almost like a dog with a snake's body, and it has the longest uh, venomous tooth of any snake. About 2.5 centimeters. That would be huge. 2.5 centimeters long. Um, yeah, the longest spine of any snake. But it's the pattern that I like most of all of this particular snake. Sort of triangular blues and almost reddish pinkish kind of coloration, which enables it to be camouflaged uh, on the floor of the forest floor in which it dwells. It's one of my
Um,
favorites.
Love it. Um, we've got a question then that comes from Queen Elizabeth School, and they've asked about you know how important is work experience in helping them prep for going into a career that might be yours, like curating, or you know working in a museum in that sort of science aspect. How important is that work experience beforehand, or is it just getting something?
Mm. Um, it's quite important. I would say it allows you to embellish your CV so that if you were to go for a job in a museum or gallery at some point in the future, you'd stand out against all the other applicants because you've had the experience. So if it's something you really want to do, then you start off as early as possible by getting that work experience under your belt. If not work experience, then volunteering is also another route that you can take, which a lot of people have taken, which a lot of my colleagues had taken before actually getting a job at the museum too. So yeah, it's very important.
um, as another question, and it's kind of similar to this one, but rather than focus on work experience, it's focusing on field work. So Didsbury High School have asked, what are some of the best ways that we, the students, can prepare and educate ourselves for working in this field and in field work?
Hmm. So some schools actually do uh, field work of this nature, in a sense, when they have trips abroad. They may not be collecting per se or handling critters, but just going around in the bush, just being in that environment. I know we have some groups that go into the field here in the UK. I know we don't have we're not blessed with an array of all the different types of reptiles that you find in warmer climates, but we do have groups that go out and look, for example, at slow worms or frogs and toads here in the UK. So if you can't go abroad looking for creatures, then you certainly can join some of those groups in the UK. Um, get in touch with perhaps wildlife groups in the UK, or um, the zoo, and see how you can join various groups that go out and visit or try and see certain things in the spring which come out then. You don't really even have to go that far. There are places right here in London where you're able to see animals that are out and about, mostly from the spring, during the summer, etc. Um, Even in Regent's Park, there's a snake called the Escalapian snake, which comes out during the spring and the summer. If you walk along the Regent's Canal, you might be able to spot one or two. And not many people know about that. But
Sounds awful.
even birds, oh, they're not venomous, but they are quite big. Um, so yeah, joining various wildlife groups, I think, is a way in to field work and preparing yourself for field work. It's all about having an eye for seeing things. I think you develop an eye for spotting things, which we normally don't do. I mean, everybody knows how to spot a fox, for example, because they're big, but in London. But smaller things, it's about developing an eye for them and just searching, looking up, looking under boulders and rocks in the park and looking for creatures that way. That helps you prepare for field work if you're ever to work in an institution which does it on a regular basis in the future. So having that inquisitive mind and going out there just in the park or uh, along the beach, that sort of thing, will help you prepare for the types of fieldwork that we do in the museum.
Definitely. We're heading towards the end of the time, so I'm going to ask you a final question. I'm going to mush two together. So we've got, what's your favourite part of your job and the best bit about working in science?
Yeah, without question, it's because I'm a sort of outdoory type person. Fieldwork is definitely the best part of my job. Um, Getting out there and being an ambassador, if you like, for science from the UK, from the museum, collecting and sharing with other people the types of things that we do in the museum. But getting out there and field work is definitely the best part of my job, for sure. I mean, it's not like I don't enjoy museum work as well, working with the exhibitions and with the collections and inquiries, etc. My colleagues are wonderful people, but I do like getting out because of just who I am. I'm sort of an outdoorsy type of person, and you can very well work in a museum and not do field work as well if that's not what you like doing. Some of my colleagues have done that too, where they just work in the museum. There's no real remit for you as a curator to have to do the field work, but it's something that I wanted to do during my career, and so I pushed for it.
Well, we are at the end of our time now, and I think that's a really interesting note to end on. So, as we sort of say goodbye today, do you have any final thoughts and feelings that you'd like to share with our viewers watching?
No, just if you're interested in a particular thing, um, don't always go with what the crowd says you should go for. If you have an interest in bees, just develop that interest, and take it as far as you can take it. You may end up being a bee specialist, a bee expert one day, a world expert even. So no matter how small it is, whatever your interest is, just stick with it, and you will be rewarded with an experience, a career that you not only uh, can develop and make your own, but you will enjoy. Because at the end of the day, you'll be working in that particular arena for a very long time. So enjoy it and do something that you really want to do rather than something that somebody else says you should do because this is, um, you know, the most popular area that you should be working in right now. So stick to what you know and what you love doing, and take it as far as you can take it.
I love it. A very nice sort of clip to think about as we close today. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for talking to us about the world of reptiles and how we kind of, I guess we take it for granted all the specimens. So it's really nice to get to talk to someone who's had that hands-on, been out in the field work. It's been really interesting to listen to how your career kind of moved and your experiences. You're very an experienced 37 years at the museum. It's been a privilege to kind of have you on and talk to us. So thank you for giving your time up today. Very much appreciate it.
You're more than welcome.
All right, everyone. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. A huge thank you to all of you that tuned in, and hopefully you're feeling like you know a little bit more about what it could be to work in a museum and to work with specimens or creating curating. And you have found that a little bit interesting because I know that I certainly did. So yeah, hope you all have a wonderful afternoon, and we will hopefully see you next time.